Rahmanir Rahim. Salam, hello, peace to you all. Sorry, it seems like StreamYard didn't unmute me. We are now live, hopefully, and we're also live for Office Hours, the 14th edition, if you can believe it. Almost every week, we have had this opportunity to bring together a community of people who want to learn, discuss, think about what's going on in the world. And almost every occasion, I've had a wonderful guest, and this is no exception. I want to welcome somebody who's known to the community in the chat because he has been a faithful attendee and making wonderful remarks and insights there in the chat as part of the discussion, but of course is also somebody who has been a guest in the past on struggle session live stream panels and on the show, and I've been a guest on Resistance is Fertile once or twice in the past, and always enjoyed wonderful discussions. And we even collaborated on a great discussion with Radhika Desai that I think we have to have her back on again and resume the dialogue because so much has been happening. So, of course, you know the radical psychologist and anti-imperialist, Benji Schoendorff. Welcome. It's great.
Thank you very much for having me on again, Adnan, especially being on Office Hours, because I'm a kind of a failed academic, I guess. You know, when the time came to choose whether I would go full on into academia or do something useful with my life, I'm sorry, guys, and become a clinical psychologist and help folks, you know, who were stuck in painful places, I went for being able to see the result of my work. But you know, thinking about complicated stuff has always been kind of my joy. As a kid, I would, everything mechanical that came into the house, I would take apart, and, you know, gradually I was able to put it back together. But I just want to understand how things work. And then, you know, you graduate from this and you go, so how does society work? And if you're lucky, you come across Marxism and you get an idea of, you know, the dynamics that are behind political economy. And the next thing you go is, okay, now that people know this, why aren't they doing a revolution? And then you start thinking, well, maybe there is something going on in the way we look at the world, and you start getting interested in you know, what is known as psychology. And so in a way, you know, when I did go and become a clinical psychologist, that kind of stayed with me, that idea of how does that fit in my general passion for understanding how society works. And society is made up of people, of course, and not just individuals, but also communities. And gradually, you know, I came across an approach to psychology, which eventually, like for the past, I've been researching it, studying it. I know it very well now for the past 15 years or so, but over the past 5 years, it's really come to my attention that this might be what I consider to be the missing link to the Marxist explanation of societies, because there is no Marxist psychology, and you can't blame Marx for it, because, you know, he wrote in the middle of the 19th century when psychology didn't even exist as a discipline that, you know, kind of came out of what Western psychology, came out of Western philosophy. And I think it's something that has been missing, you know, in the same way as capitalists didn't need capital to start exploiting folks, but in a way, the communist movement needed capital to know how this thing was working and what to do about it. I think something similar is going on with respect to individual and collective psychologies, and basically this you know, the capitalist, the imperialist don't need to really know how psychology, human psychology works to conduct their 24/7 worldwide totalizing psychological warfare. But I believe we need one so that we know both how to resist individually, psychologically speaking, to resist collectively, psychologically speaking, and to take the fight to them in a way that allows us to build the broadest possible alliance, but an alliance that is truly emancipatory, that is truly the alliance of all the free people of the world, and not replacing one, oh, well, it's all the fault of that group. No, it's all the fault of that other group. And, imagining that things will get better if we only change targets. Uh,
Yes.
there is no target. There is common humanity. Once we recognize it, we can build something new for the free people of the world.
Well, that's a wonderful introduction to you and to the topic for today's episode. I do want to mention that we are streaming not only on YouTube and on X on my channel, but also on Substack.
Right.
Listeners, welcome to you on Substack of Resistance is Fertile Substack, I believe.
That's correct.
And also on the X account of Resistance is Fertile. And
of me actually.
Just on Benji's Twitter account. But I do want to point out that this is an opportunity for you to retweet it, whether you're watching on my X or account or Benji's, to share, to like the stream if you're watching on YouTube. There must be a way. I'm less familiar with Substack, even though I have one. I need to figure out Substack and learn it. But however, there must be a way that you can share it and spread the news about this live stream there and indicate that you're supportive of this this particular stream. So do it over there if you're watching on Substack, and share it as well generally on social media. And I think what I want to say about that is just that we're not streaming on Resistance is Fertile's YouTube account. We could have done that in the past, and we have done collaborative work, like the episode where we collectively together interviewed Radhika Desai and had a wonderful conversation that I mentioned earlier. That also came out on the Resistance is Fertile YouTube channel. But unfortunately, because of various kinds of algorithms, political pressures, and so forth, Resistance is Fertile was suppressed and banned on YouTube. And I think there's still an opportunity for people to show that they are outraged by this and that they want it restored. And perhaps, Benji, you might tell people about that campaign and how they can indicate that they want it to be restored to YouTube.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, if you are not on Substack, please just go there, open an account. It's free and everything, and subscribe to us. It's also completely free. It just helps us put the message across. When we got banned, we were, newcomers on the scene, and we're at around 2,300. Now we're about 1,300 on Substack. So, for sure, I will be happy when we're back at the same number. We also have this program where we're using the paid subscriber feature of Substack, but not to put money in our pockets. In fact, to make us donate more. So if you become a paid subscriber, you'll get absolutely no benefits beyond knowing that the money you send us will go straight to one of our small fundraisers in Gaza, plus 50% from our own pockets. So, and we put receipts.
It's a matching scheme.
It's a matching scheme. We match just 50%. Well, actually, if you become one of those crazy founding members, which we, Christian, that is not the word, Islam or whatever, Jude, no, I don't know what, which we termed, of course, Resistance Nourishes, then we are going to give match 75% of your donation. And regularly, whenever we send the donations, we post the receipts, so you can see your money being sent to a place where it is really useful. Because we had You had him also, and you had Hamza last week,
Yeah.
and we had him also on Tuesday before it was organized by Sasha. Before I actually saw him, I wasn't aware that he was the same guy you'd had. But he said something very interesting. There's kind of three wars. There's the war on the ground. There is the narrative psychological war, but there is also the war by hunger. And that war, brothers and sisters, we can fight. We in the West, who actually most of our comfort, for those of us who have a bit of comfort, it's not all of us, as we all know, it comes from, basically extracting value from our brothers and sisters in the global majority. So we have a chance to fight materially that hunger war by sending cash to our brothers and sisters in Gaza. So we are not hopeless. They are not helpless. You don't need to take up, weapons and to go fight in Gaza. It would probably be difficult for all sorts of ways for many of us to do it, but you can actually really become a fighter in the hunger war, and not, of course, by giving your money to the imperialist NGO, industrial, military, political complex, but by going straight to where it's most needed. So,
Yeah. That was a great point of analysis that he mentioned, and I think goes along with the reason why we had a fundraiser for the Samir Project and why we've done various things with other left space podcasters and YouTube hosts who share our anti-imperialist orientation for Lifeline for Gaza and so forth, because what you are doing is at least equipping people to be able to stay on the land and continue to resist. And it reminds me very much. There is a statement in, I believe, one of the prophetic hadith that prayer is the weapon of the believer, right? So, we may get into talking a little bit about the psychological warfare and how resistance against disinformation, attempts to depress us, suppress us politically through psychological warfare and all of that is in its way its own kind of spiritual response to that kind of notion that we cannot be defeatist and defeated. And so there's multiple levels, actually, I would say, in which resistance takes place. And, it reminds me very much as a historian of the way in which the Crusades invented, you might say, some sort of sense of total mobilization for war. Okay. Because what happened is that there were a few people who could be convinced to, leave everything behind for a few years, go on a terribly risky and dangerous journey to go, slaughter, Muslims and Jews and Eastern Christians, because they did all of that in the so-called Holy Land, something that they invented as a concept for themselves then during that period, and wasn't really how they referred to the whole territory before. But so they went from one holy land, that is Christendom, which they had started to sanctify, to go and recapture another one, but not everybody could go. And so they started developing two things. One, liturgical prayer. Everyone could pray in society and be focused and mobilize their sort of psychological, emotional, spiritual support for the crusade. Even if you couldn't go, maybe you could pray. Right. So that's something everyone could do. And increasingly, they started to try and develop the mechanisms for expanding the faithful community of prayer for this so-called holy war of these crusades. And secondly, is if you couldn't go, you could donate and help somebody go, right? So that you would get the reward, the spiritual reward, the social reward of being a supporter and benefactor of the crusades. So they, for these evil purposes of trying to develop, the earliest kind of, we would say the earliest cases of the modern settler colonial project and settler colonial violence and war, they developed these mechanisms for expanding and making sort of total war possible. And you
Yeah.
can see that likewise, when they got there, they were ready to massacre like whole societies and kill and slaughter all people, which was something that, of course, yes, there were cases of siege warfare. There were some occasions of that sort of brutality, but it became much more normative in this kind of holy, sanctified war
Yeah.
that was a total war, total mobilization, and total destruction on the other side.
Yeah.
And so what we have to do is we have to develop total resistance. And that's what I think what Hamza was talking about essentially, and what you were just highlighting, Benji.
Yeah.
And what I think the task for today in some ways is exactly to talk about what the title you gave for us to really discuss is liberation psychology as a feature, you might say, of a resistant, form of our own mobilization. And so to get into that topic, I want to ask you first, for those who are not so familiar with the discipline of psychology, everyone knows something about it or thinks they know something about it. A clinician will have a much more precise kind of idea about it. We all have our pop psychology ideas, and we recognize that consciousness, and in a way you could say, it was fascinating what you said about Marx. Of course, we can't expect him to have developed like every form of social science. But, in the concept of false consciousness, is a kind of invitation to think about what are the barriers, what is the nature of social consciousness. I think he would have approached it from that sort of perspective of the social consciousness. As it happens, it was developed, about individual consciousness. But the idea that you were interested in, why isn't everybody dedicated to a free, fair, just, equitable world? There's something going on that's short-circuiting, this project. Marxists would call it false consciousness. And that's the invitation to really think about, well, what is consciousness? So maybe you can tell us, what is kind of the background of psychology, and why was something like you're saying what is a new liberation psychology? Well, what was the old liberation psychology that had to develop within this tradition and this discipline? And maybe you can talk about what its kind of outcomes were, what it did, what it failed to do.
It's a good, it's lucky we have about 5 hours in front of us.
That's right.
I just want to say, I was wondering how long it would be before you mentioned the Crusades, and it was 12 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm here for it. I love it, because it's so important to understand where things come from, right? And there are some very deep roots to the fuckery that's going on today, both in terms of political economy, but also in terms of psychological landscape, or I call them identities, and I'll say more about this in a minute, that need to be looked at back. Otherwise, we might, miss the forest for the tree. I think we'll just see, oh, this is this problem. But, it's completely seen historically, whereas it's kind of a shape-shifting monster that is based on some basic contradictions inside human psychology. I use human in inverted commas because you'll see why later. But you mentioned this thing that's very important. We are here. I am not about providing a new interpretation of psychology. I don't give a damn about this. I'm about changing psychology and changing the world. And you don't just change the world by changing your mind, and you don't just change your mind by changing the world. Those are interconnected things. This is what dialectical materialism is about, is there is this constant interaction between this weird thing that emerged out of matter, specific human form of consciousness, and matter itself. So, and this is what Marx called praxis. And we always need to evolve new ideas coming from our own practice, and then, change the world as we can with those, and change the ideas as the world, as our interaction, whatever you call the world, tells us could be useful. So that process is ongoing. And what I was saying about Marx earlier is I think all the ideas were there. Yes, like in any epoch, the ruling ideas are the ideas of the ruling class is exactly what it is. And the question is, how does it get there? Well, the praxis, trying to evolve new ideas that can help us shape this in a way to build, strengthen a global revolutionary consciousness is the task at hand. So this is why I talk about a new liberation psychology, because the one we've had so far hasn't yet done the job of liberation. I mean, it's done some of the job. It's led to the October Revolution, and there's plenty of brilliant podcasts you can watch, to get to know more about that world-changing event. The Chinese Revolution, there's been the anti-colonial revolution, there's been, many experiments, there's been the Palestinian resistance movement. There have been all sorts of movements that have been effective, that have gone some way. So, no, it's not like, oh, everything in the past was crap, we need new stuff. But clearly, we need something, I believe, a psychology that can unite the free people of the world, if I can speak in that way. I'm both haunted and inspired by that phrase that comes out of Gaza. When they speak to us, they speak to the free people of the world. And I believe they know what they are doing. Like, I have chosen to believe that these people are strategic geniuses. Whether they are or not, future will tell us. But for now, things are, panning out. And when they say this, they are speaking to a part of inside each and every one of us that longs to be free from this bullshit, that longs to be free from this death machine that really is capitalist imperialism. And I'm in the process of reading Ali Kadri to a wonderful reading group organized by millennials or Killing Capitalism. Shout out to you, Jared. You're doing God's work, really, in terms of political education. You are such a gift to all of us. Thank you. And so are you, of course, Adnan. And Adnan is sexy, as someone said in the comments, which unfortunately I can't match. And so we need something that will help us, and it needs to be based in everybody's experience, but also, as Marxism was, based in actual science. And I believe that there is something that could get us there, which is the particular bee in my bonnet at the moment.
Well, firstly, I have to say, the commenter, Arjun, a wonderful podcast, Deep into History, which has been nominated for an award. Maybe, we'll get, Arjun.
He said, I'm sexy. It's you have the best podcast in the world, comrade.
That's right.
Everybody should
exactly.
subscribe to your podcast.
We're all ready to vote. Benji's ready to endorse your bid for winning this award now. But you should post that in the chat so that people can learn about Deep into History podcast and also go vote. I think it was for best documentary.
Oh my God, I don't know the channel, and I'm so looking forward to discovering it.
Yeah, it's
beautiful.
Great. It's great. And so of course, this is maybe what's worth thinking about here a little bit more and getting you to elaborate is kind of what are some of the components of this link. You mentioned making the kind of hidden link, as it were, between, I mean, maybe one way to think about it for those who are familiar with this kind of classic division that is, almost tired, but it's bedevils really analysis, which is that superstructure, base and superstructure,
and also mind and matter.
Right. And that's right. Mind and matter. You've got culture versus political economy. You have base superstructure. You've got ideology versus political, material forces of production. Right. So we have all of these. And you were pointing out that what's important or interesting is to think about minds being constituted by conditions, while
And
also
conditions being shaped by
shaped by it. So
mind.
that's I
Yeah.
guess where I wanted to ask you, how does one, beyond recognizing that there might be this mutually informing dialectical
Yeah.
kind of approach, how does one tease out when you're trying to analyze somebody or some phenomenon and bring in this kind of social psychological dimension to dialectical materialist analysis?
Exactly. So first, as we think of those opposites like mind, body, spirit, matter, superstructure, base, all the rest of it, I, amongst the people who believe the only way to approach this kind of stuff is dialectically. So there are a contradiction of things that actually represent a higher unity at some level, but there is interaction going on between these two things. And, at one point, one will be on top, if you like, and the other one on the bottom. It's a kind of a yin yang thing. I think is a nice way to also conceptualize what dialectics and contradictions are about. It doesn't mean we fight until somebody dies on the ground or stays on. It means, things are always animated by this movement. Well, or maybe they're not, but to think of existence that way is very fruitful, and that's enough for me. And so, how can we account for the emergence of mind? And it's very difficult to do it. Either you go very positivistic, well, it's just there and whatever, or you go, we can see that sometimes we do things, without really knowing why we do them. So there must be some force that we're not aware of. And then comes Freud and says, yeah, it's the unconscious. It's just because you wanted to. Oh, I never remember the order. Is it because you wanted to have sex with your mom and kill your dad? Or first kill your dad? Anyway, apparently the order is very important. And that's why. And I get the idea. Yeah, there is something we all know, we can directly experience. We do things, we think things in ways that we can't really control. So how do we account for that? Because if you think about it politically, clearly those things also have an impact. We're all sensitive to advertising. Advertising is also a lot of what politics is about these days. The Nazis, in case you didn't know, came into power by literally hiring advertisers. And the Zionists did something very similar. Right? Oh, how can we make this popular? Let's call it this name from 3,000 years ago, Israel. That way people will believe it's the same thing, right? They can't believe it's not butter, but it's not butter. It's just a colonial imperialist project. It's nothing to do with whatever was written in that book whenever it was actually written. And so how do we account for those things? And interestingly enough, because, I believe part of the answer comes from the behavioral research universe. I say this like that because, behaviorism is generally associated with conditioning rats, or maybe behavioral economics, nudging people into doing stupid stuff like, voting for Tony Blair or what have you. But it's a very different kind of behaviorism. Behaviorism is just saying, okay, we look at an organism as it interacts with its environment, and we look at those interactions. And sometimes we see them move towards stuff and sometimes move away from stuff. This is like the basis of what a behavioral approach to organisms is, right? And a new research program has actually, I believe, found the basic process from which emerge meaning, language, complex cognition, the very specific form of consciousness we call human consciousness, and individual and collective identities, both conscious and oftentimes not so conscious. And this process is just super simple. It's basically relating things with one another. Now, many organisms can relate things with one another. Pavlov, the Russian physiologist, showed that if you ring a bell just before you give food to a dog, eventually the dog will learn the relation between the bell and the food, And what will happen? The bell will now make the dog salivate. Some of the physiological functions of the food will now have been transferred to the bell because this organism, here, this one here, has learned to relate those things together, right? And it's very interestingly because these physiological functions, they have to do with what? Salivating, which prepares for digestion, and also it will make the dog move towards the source of food, right? Only some functions are transferred because unfortunately a bell will never feed a dog, right? But it prepares, so it makes people move. And we humans who have learned language, you know what we call that? Emotions. We call those things emotions, those physiological activations. And we call them emotions precisely because they make us move. In emotion, there is this motion idea, right? And so,
Well, even the word itself.
exactly, the word, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
And you could say, in a way, but in an important way, the bell now has some of the meaning of. And another word for meaning is sense. Another word for sense is direction. It's all action. It's all active. It's all living organisms doing stuff in the world. It's not like, a dead structure inside which you fit. None of that stuff. It's all action. Another way to think about behavior, if you like the word behavior because of its past, it's action. It's all action. And so we learn to relate things with one another. Animals can learn to relate even abstract relations. Like you can actually train a sea lion to choose the biggest of a set of balls. Whenever it touches the big ball in the set, you give them the favorite mackerel. So, basic behaviorism. And eventually one day you will bring a completely new set of balls and your sea lion will go straight for the biggest of this new set of balls. So we could say that the sea lion has abstracted the relation bigger than, right? Okay. So it's not specific to humans. Quite a number of, let's say, complex organisms display this. We can see it in the lab. We can reproduce it. And in humans, what we do when we grow around verbal humans is we get trained to relate things with one another. We make this sound, ball, and then we show this round thing that can be fun to interact with, right? And gradually the child will learn, like the bell and now, the relationship between that sound, ball, and that round thing that you can have fun with. Right? Of course, this works in only one direction with the dog. If you give the food and you ring the bell will never have the functions of the food. And so you have to train the other relation. Like in a child, you will train the sound ball with the object, but then you also have to train the object with the sound. You show the object to the child and go, ball. You see, it's the other direction now. And gradually, the child will, relate reliably the fun round object and the sound ball, and the sound ball and the fun round object. You can also train this in animals. You have to train the two relations. But in humans, the vast majority, not all of them, but in vast majority of humans are around 13 months of age, of many, many examples of this, right? A big quantity of that basic relational learning, suddenly a new quality emerges dialectically. And that quality is the ability to derive a relation that has not been directly trained. So after a while, you will show, I don't know, this other thing, it's called Rubik's Cube, this sound, Rubik's Cube, and there is this square multicolored thing. And your child will derive, so the square multicolored things is the same as this sound, Rubik's Cube, right? Without training it for free, so to speak. And this only humans up until today have been shown to do in psychological experimental labs. In the case of human, it's developmental psychology because we, can see this in children. And remember that when you derive things, it's not just, oh, this is the same as that, but the functions also start deriving. If it's a moving toward function, like the ball is fun. Oh, now if you say, the ball is like the Rubik's Cube, then now you'll want to move towards the Rubik's Cube. Hey, it's a new toy. It's a new game, right? But of course, if it's like, if you ring the bell and give an electric shock to that poor little dog here, please subscribe or the dog gets the electric shock. No, I'm joking. Then, of course, the functions of the bell will be moving away functions, which we humans will learn to call fear or stress or whatever. And so this is what meaning is, right? The meaning for us human is when those functions start to be derived, the relations start to be derived, and the functions of the things that are related start changing. And of course, you train one, you get one free, but look what happens if you train three. So, Benji is older than Adnan, who is older than, I'll say, Eva, Aude, although I'm not sure, but let's just say it's the case, right? So we've now trained two relations. Your child, around 23 months of age, will start deriving 3 square, 4 new relations, right? Two square, excuse me, you train two. The relation that Benji is older than Eva. Eva is young. Adnan is younger than Benji. Eva is younger than Adnan, and this one that was never related, that Eva is actually younger than Benji. So, and then if you train 3, then you derive 9. And this is an activity, right? It's not something that's inside your head. And you get in the habit of deriving these things really, really quickly. And this is language and complex cognition emerging. How so? Well, you're suddenly able to go in your mind. So if I relate this piece of wood to this gap between the two sides of the river, I forget, banks of the river, and I put it in this way, what happens? So you do all this relating in your whatever. This activity of relating is not really in your mind, but this is just a metaphor. There's nothing in your mind except neurons. And you can then test it out in the world, praxis, and if it works, well, you've just invented the bridge. Great job. And as you do this with other people, you have also done what? Invented language. Language emerges as this dialectical leap from the quantity of derived relations, right? So you see, it's a basic process, very simple. You learn to relate things and it changes their functions. It's the basic process, like in all good science, there is just one. And as you get a big quantity of them, the quality changes. Mm-hmm. Then you get a big quantity of that new quality of derived relations. The quality changes. Now it's a language, right? Now it's what we call complex cognition. Dogs can't do this. My dog is very smart, but he can't do that. He's not building his own doghouse. And the next thing that happens, well, in my proposition, but it kind of happens simultaneously, is the emergence of human consciousness. This is what happens. We are trained by the people around us. I call it the verbal community, because this is an entirely social process. You get raised by wolves, you don't do it. You can't do it. It's a human social process. It's a product of social interactions, which you can see why we're not miles away from Marxism here. And you learn these 3 distinction relations that are very important. One is the difference between here and there, spatial difference. This is here, this is there. And literally, if you start looking at people talking to toddlers, or yourself, if you have little kids, you're going to notice that you do these things thousands of times. I am here, you are there. Dad is there, I am here. No, mom is there, I am here. We do this literally thousands and thousands of times until the kid gets it. And what does the kid get? The ability to do ongoing distinction between here and there. Another one very important is the ongoing distinction between now and another time, which what another time means can actually change according to what we call these days epistemologies. Unfortunately, I am Western trained and I know very little about other epistemologies, ways of knowledge, philosophies and stuff, except for the stuff that the white people have stolen and pretended they invented. So that I know. There's a lot of it like this, probably the majority of it. If I look at what we do in terms of political economy and what we use in everyday material life, I have a good suspicion that what we use in our everyday intellectual life is probably also pillaged from all over the world, right? And so that time can be different. What we call now and then can be different, but every human community has some kind of distinction between now and some other time, whatever that, however that appears in the social interactions between the humans. And the third one, which is going to be the one that really interests us in terms of building revolutionary consciousness, is the third distinction is a spatial distinction, but also an interpersonal distinction. And the spatial distinction between me here, this perspective here, if you like, and you there, out there, others out there. And I say it's spatial because, as I understand it, again, from a base of ignorance, I didn't go to Wikipedia, but, it's kind of same sort of sources. There are, as I understand, Aboriginal languages, for example, who don't really have notions of me and you. And when they speak to other people, they will say something like, okay, there is joy northwest of here, meaning, I am here and I see you being happy there. There is anger northeast of here. So, and there we can see in the making how spatial are these differences. Clearly, in a culture like this, capitalistic, neoliberal, Thatcherite individualism, like there is no society, there are only individuals, is very unlikely to appear and to be maintained, right? But we still need that distinction between, and that distinction is super interesting because there is something, they're all dialecticals, you understand, because they're all, as in Hegel, everything is only defined by the distinction with the other thing. There is no here without there. There is no now without then. You don't have the definitions floating in the air. And there is no me without you. And when that distinction happens, in whatever form it takes, when we suddenly recognize in the eyes of another human being that this is the same as me and yet different. It is at one and the same time totally the same and totally different. And that is when these three distinctions are made on an ongoing basis. We become a full member of the verbal community and we start experiencing what we human call consciousness. I mean, we're so stupid and limited. We imagined that this was the only consciousness in the world. I look at my dog's eyes, I see consciousness. I look at the spider's 8 eyes, it's harder for me to see consciousness there. But you know what I mean? It's just different kind of consciousness. My dog is not like, he doesn't worry about filing tax returns. Although the way he sighs, sometimes you wonder,
It might have sympathy because we can understand that northeast of him, there's great frustration
with the fucking tax
return
form.
filing and all of that. But that's interesting. I don't want to go too much on this tangent before we start getting into the connection to a liberation psychology. But that just this discussion here about forms of consciousness and the possibility of other ones, both in other human cultures and societies, but also across, you might say, the web of life and different species is interesting. I once read something that really had an effect on me, which was that mammals, like it's very hard actually to figure out what's really the difference between, mammals and others, and us versus the rest of mammals, and
Yeah.
like these categories that are created in what used to be called zoology, but is
Yeah.
basically just like
Yeah.
species biology, about
Mhm.
kind of organizing and figuring out these characteristics and how you determine difference of a species when so much of the genetics is still really the same. So at that molecular level, it's very hard to say, well,
Yeah.
mouse versus a human, I mean, they have 98% or whatever it is of the same genetics, et cetera, et
Mhm.
cetera. But the argument there, and it was also trying to think about how one would deal with the question of animal rights and so on, is that in particular, mammals, it seems that one of the features, you might say, in a way, is that you can recognize an emotional consciousness in
Mm.
the other, right? It's not the same, it's not the same. They don't understand everything, but there is a kind of recognition
Mm.
that they can recognize you and your face and different emotions and the way it's being expressed.
Mm.
You can also see some kind of, so there is a dialectic,
Yeah.
but again, it's like across a divide because there are different forms of
Mm.
consciousness, but there is enough of a dialectic that
Mm.
exists that animals who are like
Mm.
mammals can be part of society, of social
Yeah.
organizations, like the
Mm.
household. The household is a social organization, and people can have members who are non-human in it that have their rights and have their
Mhm.
relationships, and it is a social and a parasocial kind of
And
separation.
so just to, yeah, if I may, I will come back to this question a little bit later in my presentation, but it's a very important one. I just want to say that, from a kind of hardcore scientific perspective, this relating stuff creates physiological activations, and no organism moves without physiological activation, not even amoebas, right? Now, it's very hard to go, okay, at this particular level, it's not physiological activation, I'm going to call it emotions, because that's just a purely human concept. But at the same time, the recognition that you're talking about is real. And once you're what I call a verbal human, you're able to do this particular stuff we do, you can not see it, right?
Yeah.
And it has deep meaning for us in terms of human experience. But I just want to go to the next step, because this is where it's going to get political.
Yes.
So this thing emerges of I here now, and wherever you go, I'm going to be me here now. I'm never going to reach tomorrow. When I go there, I'm still here. And even if I take Adnan's place and grow a beard, I will still be me, and it will still be the other, right? So that's what human consciousness is, actually. And you see, it emerged dialectically as a dialectical leap once we can reliably do those three distinctions. And the minute we can't reliably do them, or if we don't learn to reliably do them, we simply cannot speak with meaning, i.e., be understood by others, and we cannot listen with understanding. And when we lose it, we're basically, we step outside of the verbal community. Depending on how repressive your society, you can be locked up, or you can be just seen as somebody who's kind of a little bit outside of the community, but you're still part of it, because it's only capitalism that needs you to really know where you are in space and time and what is your place in the world. So you go and fucking do your work, and we can extract value from you. So this is how human consciousness emerges. It emerges from this activity of relating that we do so fast and on an ongoing basis that it starts forming sort of networks, but they're not structures outside or inside ourselves. They're just habits of relating. And all complex organisms are creatures of habit, right? And so what happens is gradually our identity emerges from this. So it's a dynamic system with many, many vectors, a little bit like the weather. And it organizes around two poles or attractors. One is concerns me and my stuff, my thoughts, my emotions, my histories, my narratives, my personal history, and what I do in the world. And the other one, which is often codependent, co-defined by it, is me in relation to others, to you. Who am I in relation to you? And once a pole emerges, it will become an attractor, like exactly like, a tornado will attract everything, whereas before it was going in every single direction. So if a pole emerges that I'm worthless, it will continue to attract everything around that. So for example, you'll gain the first prize in basketball and then at school and be part of the popular group, but it might still not work because, it will all be sucked into if they really knew that I am worthless. The attractor is there. Okay. And this is the basis of individual and collective identities, right? And the dialectical contradiction at the heart of each and every individual and collective identity has to do with the basic stuff. Same and different. I am the same as you and I am different. And how that same and different dialectics organizes itself will literally determine whether you're going to be happy and free or miserable as fuck, or a miserable fuck that brings misery to everybody. Let me explain. Either it is, and this is my bread and butter, people who have grown inside identities that their history and often enough their culture has prescribed as less than in terms of fundamental human worth. I am less worthy of a human as others. I am less of a human as others, right? And these are the people that, I see for my work. You can also have, I am more as a human than others. And this is the people you find, doing Hasbara, joining the army, becoming politicians and CEOs.
Companies.
Right. And
politicians.
Presidents of universities and
Right.
what have you.
Right.
Yeah. But this process also works at the collective level, right? And so you can have literally communities, groups of people in which these identities will emerge. We are more than others, or we are less than others. And now if you think about the development of capitalism, what do you think is more likely and more useful in a capitalistic system? That people develop identities where they go, I am just as worthy as everybody else, no more, no less, but everybody is free to self-determine in whatever way they want because they are just as human as me in terms of fundamental human worth. Do you think that's the kind of basic identities that are going to be promoted, nurtured, and maintained by an exploitative, death-dealing, genocidal system? Or do you think it's more likely that it will be the kind of identities that go more than, less than in terms of fundamental human worth? These people have impure blood, as the Spanish Inquisition one day invented. So they are less human than us. Therefore, we can bring all sorts of, death and destruction and plunder and rape and robbing on them, right? The answer is very clear. So the system literally keeps us trapped. It needs us to be trapped inside identities that prescribe more than, less than, that go on that side of the dialectics, right? That nourish that side of the contradiction. And sometimes things start shifting, like when the resistance in Gaza speaks to the free and noble people of the world. You know what they're saying? They're saying, we are you, you are us, we are equally as worthy. You deserve self-determination. It's not even a question of desert. And we too, because we are human just as you. And, anybody who's had this experience of looking into the eyes of, with children, it's easier for many of us, but even, one of those persons in Gaza on those videos, you know what I'm talking about. We have this experience when you go, oh, what's the expression? There, but for the grace of God, go I, or something. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this is me. They, uh, and this is, as a clinical psychologist, this is my graal. Bring free people, dismantle the systems of meaning, the identities in which people have been trapped since early childhood that pegs them as less worthy than others. And when they get to the place, oh, I'm just as worthy as everybody else, then they can be whoever they want to be. Except when they leave my office, they're still in the middle of a fucking death machine, artificial intelligence, also known as imperialist capitalism. But apart from that, they're free. And so if we scale this up at the collective level, this is where we want to build our new class consciousness. Forget about the interests of the working class or this nation or that nation. Go for self-determination. Why? Because we are all equally human. And this is why dehumanization is such a big deal and such a big trap. Because once you're, Fanon talked about, the colonized mind and the colonizer mind, and they try, the colonizing the mind is to trapping you inside a system where you think you're more than, but also where you might think that you're less than, and then you have to prove your whiteness. You have to prove that you are human after all. But you can never prove it, because humanity is not something you can prove, you can gain, you can lose, you can deny, or you can bargain for. You either recognize it in the eyes of the other or you don't. But there is nothing else you can do with humanity. And if you do anything else, you do this really strange thing that you actually psychologically exclude yourself from humanity. So this is how the dehumanizer dehumanizes themselves. And they don't even do it consciously. They don't go, I'm going to dehumanize dark people, and as a result get dehumanized. But you see, because you're suddenly outside of humanity. And this is why they literally want to transition out of humanity, because they've gone so far outside of it. And so once we get that it's like this, and we also get that what I'm saying here is not content. It's not like, well, it's because you wanted to kill your mother or whatever, your father. It's just, these processes, basic, very simple processes that go through these dialectical leaps, then it can have any content, like it can have any epistemology. And the next step, and there I want to go where you were earlier, Adnan, is once you realize this, you will realize that having a more than identity as a human over the rest of living creation is fucked up. Ali Kadri talks about social nature, and he gets it. He goes, okay, no, there is no distinction between human and nature. Humans are nature, nature is human. Again, a dialectical whole with its tension inside. But, if you go, oh no, the interests of humanity prime over everything because humans are more worthy than, I don't know what, animals or plants or rivers or whatever, mosses, then you get to a place where you will actually exclude yourself from that living system, what a web of life. And so we can see how from very basic processes, from something that can be reproduced in the lab, not something that someone dreamt of after snorting cocaine for 10 years like Freud did, understand the way forward. And also understand why there is resistance today, because the people who are most on the receiving end of that, literally, that machine, that means it's not a live algorithm, but it means to turn every living thing into dead commodities and waste. The people who are on the receiving end of that, what is happening to them is they go, oh no, I want to live because I'm alive. Because again, there's always this, dialectics between living stuff and not living stuff. And that's the rock bottom. And this is where maybe all of you on this podcast, at one point, some time, either over the past 2 years or maybe before that, you reached a place where you went, no, this is not for me. There is something that disagrees with me inside this, more than, less than, these people, they're not civilized or whatever the fuck it is. And a longing to rejoin common humanity. And this is what I call grounding in resistance. And that resistance is both an individual act and a collective act. And I believe, and this is where we get super political and super practical, I believe this can provide the basis for building a new universal, non-hierarchical, revolutionary class consciousness, which fully respects every single individual and nation's right to self-determination.
Wow, that was amazing, Benji. What a scope and compass, building from, interactions and developmental psychology and the development of social relations and social consciousness, to really thinking about what is the ideological kind of problem that we're dealing with, and the barrier to a genuine revolutionary universalist class consciousness. There's so many components to really think through, and pick up on. And so one thing I wanted to have you extend perhaps some remarks, because I did also think a bit about Fanon as you were starting to get into this kind of notion of basically the way in which racism defines these kinds of exclusions from group identity, and on the basis of being more human than others, and why that's so important, and has been so important, that the person who really perhaps contributed more than almost anyone to thinking about colonialism and race consciousness as as a problem that has to be thought through. Otherwise, capitalism itself cannot be thoroughly confronted because what you have is the situation where, and this is something that we see historically, is that the Communist Party of France supported the settler colonial regime, right?
And Stalin supported the establishment of the Zionist colony in occupied Palestine.
Well, there you have it, right? So there were ways of trying to rationalize a non-universalist. Ultimately, there were ways of trying to think through and create these barriers where you might talk about class and class consciousness, and intellectually be capable of recognizing certain principles as universal, but in point of fact, be blind to the exclusions and the exceptions that are made into the real application of that universally, and also the emotional and feelings, the sentiments, and the way that those are mobilized in ways that somebody might intellectually agree with a principle, but in point of fact, their experience and how they feel about these things reinforces the paradigms of exclusion and difference, where they react not to the sameness and build upon that, but they focus on the difference and feel. This, it seems to me, is the fear, or whatever it is, whatever is at work emotionally and psychologically, that the recognition of the real consequences of recognizing the humanity of others is so threatening, because it's interpreted and experienced as undermining what makes you you, and whatever you have in your life is threatened by that, right?
Yeah, it's those are absolutely fascinating questions and central ones as well. And so, I heard you say sameness and difference, and making those relations of distinction, of comparison, is super useful. Like, we need to do it, like, if the otter, if the sea lion can learn the relation bigger than, it has a function. And it makes us vulnerable to falling into identities based not on difference. That's fine. We can all be different. We're all different, in all sorts of ways, in abilities, maybe in achievements later, whatever you call that, in temperament, in height, in muscular mass, whatever, But it's where that relation lodges itself. And whenever it goes to the center of uh, when it goes to undermine common humanity, that's when trouble starts. And that trouble, I believe, started in Western Europe, this godforsaken place where people have been, living in horrible conditions of scarcity, where they literally had to steal from one another and kill one another for centuries, if not more, because the place is such a shithole. And I'm just trying to be a historical materialist here, right? And but that's the key, if you like. And Fanon got it. Like, if you take away the psychoanalysis, and he's a man of his time, and we all are, people of our time, it's normal. He got it. He said, okay, it also comes with that particular mental system. I don't like the word structure because it's so dynamic, and at the same time, it's got these attractors, right? And this is the problem. And then when he goes, the only way to get out of it is violence. Why does he say that? Why? Because Black people are inherently violent. Sorry for the joke. No, of course not. Because that system, those identities are born out of violence, are born out of what, we Marxists call primitive accumulation, which is not one thing that happened in the 15th, 16th century when the old English peasants were kicked out of their idyllic life on the commons. No, it is an ongoing process, very violent process, because nobody would, in their right mind, accept to work for money. I saw this great little video on Twitter last week. It's two aliens, and one turns at the other and looks, look at those weird creatures on this planet. They have a planet that literally provides plenty of everything they need to live, not just survive, live and, reproduce and go forth. and they're all forced to do these shitty jobs for people who hate their guts on pain of starving or worse. That's quite something, right? So it takes violence to get any living being to live under such conditions, ongoing violence. And that violence can only happen if we live inside identities where we go, either I'm more than and I'm going to deal the violence, or I'm less than and I'm going to take it, or I'm going to let the others do it because I'm less than and I'm not worthy to say stop the bullshit. And that is really, I think, what Fanon was getting at the end of the day. There is something, and there's something really weird because this algorithm, this artificial intelligence, really we call imperialist capitalism, is totalizing. It needs to take everything. It needs to extract value, to make a commodity out of everything, but not just objects, not just bodies, but every single human experience. If you look at what's going on social networks, this is exactly what they're doing. They are trying to turn our own experiences into commodities, everything, intimacy, parenting, everything. And when you turn it into a commodity, you make it unalive, and then you need to waste it in order to do more of the same. And so there is this process going on, and the only way to resist it is to go, oh, wait, this is a death machine, and we need to show it. Ali Kadri brilliantly showed it to us, and now we have to put this in language everybody can understand, because I'm getting migraines trying to understand how he puts it across, but he's got it right. And once we see it, it's a much more universal message to say, hey, this is trying to kill us all because of this, that, and this and that way. But we want to live, and we're the free people of the world, and we're all free in our own ways. That's why we're free, And we're just going to say no to this. We are going to resist it because it needs resisting, because I would rather be alive than dead. How about you, brother? Something like that. And that death is not just physical death, because it needs to kill social nature. It's no accident that it has bloomed in settler colonies, because what is a settler colony? Is you come to a place, you wipe out everything that was there before, every link, every social nature is very complex thing that evolves over millennia, in interaction between nature, the land, the climate, people, the other living things around, whether vegetal or animal, as we classify them. And suddenly you come here, you wipe everything, you come up with some, bullshit origin story cribbed from books that are largely apocryphal when we start looking at them really historically. And they are manifest destiny, blah, 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 promised by God 3,000 years ago, nya, nya, nya. But I was going to say it's a black hole, but it's a white hole. You know what I mean? There is nothing, there is no link. And then we find ourselves in these little places that, if we think about it for a minute, every time we walk, we're crushing skulls. We're basically crushing skulls of people who had developed a way to live in this place that made sense. And we have to reinvent everything every moment of our lives. We have to reinvent parenting, loving, intimacy, working, meaning, eating, exercising, every fucking thing. How can anybody do that? What kind of but it's all atomized, you see? And it's literally killing what it is to be human. And once we start seeing it, there's something inside us that goes, oh, fuck you, I'm not going to take this anymore. I am not this. You will not define me in that way. I'm going to join the free people of the world. I'm going to resist this, because what other thing is there? It's like, like Max Heil, and I think Aikadu also says you have two choices. Either they kill you, you can choose your death. Either they kill you to turn you into some dead commodity, or you fight them. Maybe they kill you, but you'll die a free person. I know which one I've chosen.
Well, that's the root of a liberation psychology, I think, and resistance is to be really human, is to resist this attempt to make us into commodities. I mean, that is sort of the fundamental, there's just those passages. It makes you think of those passages in Marx where he talks about the way in which the machine in the factory comes to create the person, right? Their labor becomes an extension of the machine, and it's like they are no longer creators. They don't control their labor. They don't have any way of defining it. They don't do it for their own ends. Nothing. They are purely now extensions of the capital and the labor that has been kind of already congealed into the machine, and then they are turned into a kind of automaton of the logic of that capital working itself mechanistically. And so that's being turned into a commodity. I mean, it's not even
exactly.
just paper is turned into a commodity and sold and all that, but the person is turned into a thing, right? That can be, disposed of, can be, excess, can be waste. This is what Ali Qadri, talks about. And that sort of wastefulness of the entire system. And it reminds me very much of what you were just saying, is that it's so inefficient and wasteful that the way settler colonialism works. I mean, by coming and destroying and then having to create everything itself new, it's so inefficient. And this is what I've always thought about capitalism itself. Supposedly, it's a model of efficiency. It's the most inefficient system in the world. You could imagine.
Yes and no. It's not efficient to sustain life.
No,
but it's devilishly efficient at
in its
extracting value, at
that's right,
turning the living into dead waste.
Yes, like it's very good at that.
Yeah, and there's a sentence in Capital in the early chapters that I don't know if it will ever leave my head. It's like it turns relations between commodities into social relations, and social relations into commodity relations. And this, and what I showed you earlier, helps us understand what happens. Marx calls it the fetishism of the commodity because it didn't have the thing. But it's the transformation of functions. You see now the functions of humans, of social thing, are transferred to the commodity, and the functions of the commodity being exchanged and making value are and eventually wasted, are transferred to the human through the process, very simple process I showed you earlier. So that really helps me, what is fetishism of commodity? It just means this: suddenly things start meaning, having functions, but not just meaning. They make us they make us behave like commodities, and they make commodities behave like people. But of course, they're not people, they're dead stuff. And if we leave them the power, they will kill us. And and I and once you see it, there is this very important thing that happens, and maybe we can talk about some current debates on the internet about it. Once you see it, you understand that humanity has been taken over by this unalive kind of virus. Like viruses are very strange. They're not really alive and they're not really dead. And they go into an organism and then they co-evolve with it. And some of them are really problematic and the species can disappear, and others will eventually, turn into things, into mitochondria or whatever. Well, capitalism is like this. It's like this algorithm that just reproduces itself mechanically. Like, Marx called it a vampire, but a vampire has too much free will in a way. This is like an artificial intelligence, an algorithm.
More zombie-like.
It's and nobody is free inside of this. It's not Elon Musk or whoever, the Jewish Illuminati conspiracy, or, the capitalist at Davos or whatever, going, we're going to fuck people over. Of course they do whatever they do. Michael Parenti told us, if we get together to conspire to resist them, it would be crazy to think they don't go into dark rooms to also do something like that. They do, but not in the way we tend to think. They are in a way even more the slaves of that algorithm as we are. Like, look at Elon Musk. This is Peter Thiel. Look at his recent interviews about transhumanism. This is not, it doesn't take a fully trained and licensed clinical psychologist to know that these people are not happy. They are not well in the head. Like, they suffer from one of the most painful psychological ailments, which is known as compulsive accumulation disorders. It's the most painful form of what we call, obsessive compulsive disorder. And you know what? It's the most difficult to treat. I mean, literally, people will pile so much stuff in the house, they will eventually live inside tunnels that they dig into all the stuff they pile, and one day it will fall on them and they will die. These people are the most, I've seen some in clinical setting. They're the most unhappy, campers I've had the misfortune to meet in my professional life. And these are the people who are at the top of this thing. So, and once you get it, it allows us to drop all this bullshit about the capitalist, the Jews, the this, the that. You know what I mean? Like, this conspiracy theories that because we want to make meaning, there has to be somebody who wishes this thing. But there isn't really. I mean, at the end of the day, they give expression to it. Yeah, we want to transition out of humanity and we want to fuck off to Mars because we are going to kill humanity and we are going to kill the planet. They give expression to it. But it's not like, they wanted to do this from the day they were born. They got sucked in, but their identities allowed them to get into this position. And you see, once you get this, you know that the way out is just common humanity, recognizing common humanity. And here we can maybe talk about some of the debates we've had.
We can,
online.
although I think we had a very interesting comment that I think might bring us back to a point that I'd made, or a question I'd raised earlier about, the human, non-human kind of relations. And also, I have to say, before we get into this, that I think we're going to have you back on, Benji, for a part 2, because I have so much I want to talk to you about in terms of the disinformation and resistant psychology, and so forth. So we will definitely have to have you come back on, and we might be able to get into some of the debates. But let's take that are happening on social media. But let's take this question. And I was thinking about David when we were talking about vampires and capitalism and so forth, because if people want, they should go back and listen to the Halloween edition of Office Hours, where I talked with David Schmid about horror, fact, and fiction in an age of genocide. And Marx does use a lot of these horror kind of ghoulish images and horror motifs from popular folkloric. He talks about werewolves, he talks about vampires, he talks about ghosts, and we could say, as we were saying, it's zombie capitalism in some ways. But okay, David asks, how does one make a common humanity the basis of a revolutionary consciousness without falling back into a privileging of the human over the non-human that is all other forms of life on this planet? And adds, in other words, can the concept of humanity be rehabilitated, or is it part of the problem? And I would just one coda to that to add to the question is, doesn't the other side of it also raise the question and the issue that we were just talking about, the transhumanist? Okay, so the category of the human is really doing a lot of work, but is also under total threat. So do we have any concerns about David's point, about the human non-human distinction being one that is not recuperable here, or how does it play in this? And maybe think also about how this affects the transhumanist kind of question.
This is such a great question. Thank you for raising it. I kind of signposted it a little bit earlier, but now I will make it clear. I said human in inverted commas precisely because of that. I also mentioned at one point that if what we build as a basic humanity is we humans as more worthy of being part of the web of life as any other part of the web of life, we're just going to fuck the web up, right? I mean, literally. So when I say common humanity, humanity is a loaded term, and this is why I kind of put it into, but recognizing yourself in the other. You can also do this with the dog. It would be a mistake to think that because you can see consciousness in the dog, and my dog has the most beautiful soul in the world, that you are actually seeing another one of creature that can, reliably do this activity of distinguishing I, here, now, because they just don't. You're like, we haven't been able to evidence any other being than humans, and some humans can't do it even, right? So just looking at how things function differently, some dialectics happen in some forms of whatever it is that you want to call the stuff that we seem to one day become conscious of. And I am told one day stop being conscious of, although personally I have not experienced it yet, except for very brief periods. But I think any identity that is not kind of, but once we see it, David, once we see this is the problem, then, and this is the work I do in clinical psychology, we dismantle all the systems of, and when you talk about decolonizing the mind, it's exactly the same thing. Dismantle of that system, dismantle all the supremacist system, because life is not supremacist. Like, life is a constant interaction of stuff. Even the cosmos is probably like that, and this is why I refuse to be drawn into full ontology, because I want to make full space for every possible epistemology. So I don't want to go, it's really like this, but once you look at it like that, then clearly it makes more sense. And a lot of what we call science or research tends to tell us that everything is connected. Like even the basic approach of behaviorism, which people don't see because it's been very badly presented, is just about looking at the interactions of something that's moving inside some kind of a context, some kind of an environment. And the environment, of course, as an impact or as an influence on what the organism will do, and what the organism does as an impact on the environment. Once you realize that, and like literally, we white peoples need, everybody knew it, like almost every single other way of being in the world, except those fuckers in, Western Europe, have known it for fucking millennia, even before they wrote stuff down, right? It's the way of being in the world. It always has been. If you I'm not a specialist, but if you listen to, indigenous cosmologies and stuff, it always goes back to this. Everything is interconnected. It's cyclical. This and that, and there is this force and that force, and none is above any other. And we all come from this one, but then go back to this one. You know what I'm saying? There is no. I'm not a specialist, and please, if anybody who knows, I want to be educated about this, but I don't think there is any cosmology other than the fucking white so-called Western, so-called white, so-called Western, so-called civilization, so-called humanist, so-called what did they call it? The Lumières, the light. Suddenly they believe that they are going to bring light to the darkness. It's mass delusion. And, we need to be really treated like we're all a bunch of narcissistic, deluded as a culture, and we need to be treated very kindly by people who can empathize with the way we got, how we got that way, and can understand that it made sense that we started thinking of ourselves that way, but dismantle little by little all that colonial, for lack of a better word, white, whatever you want to call it, supremacist identities, so that we can get back to the rock bottom of saying, hey, like, have you ever seen a 2-year-old look at a bug? They go, ah. None of them goes, oh, that's disgusting. They need to learn, that from adults. Do you know what I'm saying? Like a little child looking at a bug like it. Well,
Yeah,
they're doing the same. They're recognizing something living. Sorry, Adnan.
right. No, they haven't been taught not to have wonder for everything around them, right?
It's the recognition. It's the one. It's life recognizing life, right? This is what it is, and we have it even before we know who we are. We have it even before that dialectical leap to I here now has happened. Like. Literally, when I look into the eyes of my son, I was lucky enough to actually, pull him into the world. First, I thought I would just don't pull by the head is my advice. But anyway, and I looked into those eyes, and I saw it like that second. I recognized it. Like it was there, and just talking about it brings that wonderful. It's this sense of wonder that I can get from, but it's no bigger, it's no smaller. You know what I'm saying? So there's this thing going on. I don't know what to call it, and I want to call it in ways that insult nobody's spiritual beliefs that are perfectly respectable. Life recognizing life, the living recognizing the living, God seeing God, in whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. But the experience, if we point to it, we can all recognize ourselves in that experience, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, fascinating. I mean, and also this comes to a point where it's for me, and it's not necessarily a connection that everyone will have or needs to have, but this is part of what you were just talking about. This is sort of part of what motivates me in one of the series, the programs that I do in the Names of God with Mark and Applebaum, and other aspects of this interest in trying to see our connections to ourselves, to others, and to some sense of spiritual consciousness with the world, with creation, with all. That's one way of thinking about it within these religious terms and language. We would say the universe and that web of life and so on is something that we have to find more ways. So that's why I don't think it has to be my way or the way that I'm trying to do it, but I'm thinking about it and exploring it with Mark as a way of exemplifying how we can connect the psychological, the spiritual, the emotional to our political categories and to our, political consciousness. I feel like it's
Yeah.
somehow needed, and these may seem sometimes
Yeah.
like tenuous. And the purpose is not to dematerialize our analysis of, politics,
No.
power, and all of that, but to tap into some other kind of registers that don't reproduce exactly the way in which we've segmented our relation to the
Yeah.
world, which is in some ways okay, older and a product of certain kind of culture, but has then been commodified and twisted and perverted in a way that is
Mm.
so deadly to, ourselves and to life through
Yeah.
capitalism and all of what it produces in terms of these colonial kind of
And
racist
yeah,
realities and imperialism. Yeah.
here's what I want to know. Dear Marxian scholars and dialecticians, I want to know how, where, and in what way what I'm presented to you tonight is not dialectical materialist. To the best of my limited knowledge of the field, as I said before, I know very well about the psychology that I'm talking about. I've been self-identifying as a Marxist for very many years, but I'm not any kind of a Marxian scholar, let alone scholar of anything else. So I really want to know how this is not dialectical materialist, because then I'll make it more dialectical materialist. It needs to be. But I actually believe, from my basis of limited knowledge at the moment, that what I'm presented to you tonight is 100% dialectical materialist. And just to give a political illustration of it, there's this, I think it's in Class Struggle by Lo Surdo. At one point he says, Lenin did something just before the October Revolution. It's opposite because it's the anniversary. He did this thing where he shifted party propaganda. Somebody asked if we could use this for propaganda. I believe we can, when about changing the world, not just interpreting, right? Where he shifted the propaganda of the party from the working class, the interests of the working class, to everybody, human interest, donations and stuff. And that carried him over and allowed him later on to, the Bolshevik party to develop some kind of hegemony or what have you. However, one thing was still a problem, and this is what led, for example, Stalin to support the Zionist colony at first. It's this fucked up Western idea that, okay, Marx understood everything and he was going to bring the light to the darkness, basically, and it was so easy for us, and even, our Slavic brothers who are not actually that as deluded as the Western Europeans, which is why we're trying to genocide them like everybody else. But there was this thing, right? There was this thing like, yeah, but even I'm sure sincere communists going, yeah, but those Jewish guys, they can bring all the progress of whatever the fuck is this Western delusion that we have it and they don't. And because at the end of the day, knowledge is universal. Like algorithms is the name of an Islamic, I think, Iranian mathematician, right? And algorithms rule the effing world today. So is that Western? It's just part of our common humanity, our common heritage. If Marxism has anything to say to anyone, it shouldn't have to say it only to Western Europeans or to bring the light onto others. It's just a tool. Look, it's this tool. Then we have Western Marxists who spend all their life looking at the tool or doing videos of unboxing and never effing using it. No. This is a tool. And what I'm showing you here, I believe, I hope, and if other people start looking at it and confronting it and thinking around it, can actually give us a tool to fight those psychological wars, to build that new revolutionary consciousness. And what I'm saying, and I think Ali Kadri goes to the same place through the lens of political analysis of the logic of capitalist imperialism, it can only be done on the basis of, no, we just want to live, fuck off, because you're a death machine. At the end of the day, something like this. And because it's so basic and adolescent, fuck off, I won't do what you tell me, I'm going to live. You can fuck right off back to where you came from. It's going to work.
We have to hope. And I think one area to talk more when we have you on for a second time is exactly building on what are those techniques psychologically for resistance. That would be fascinating way to build upon, where we've come to in this discussion for office hours today. I think this has really left us in a good place for further exploration, and I so much appreciate it, Benji. I know
May
that.
I abuse your time and say just one little thing in response to a very insightful comment from our friend Ode to John Truddle, wonderful artist. And she goes, Western thought is not common to indigenous cultures, very different value systems. They do not match, absolutely 100%. And thank you for saying it, because if I said anything that sounded like this, I misspoke. What I mean is we have convinced ourselves that what is of, part of our common heritage as humanity is particular to us, and it comes with what we call values and all that bullshit. But that's not at all what I'm talking about. A tool is a tool. A tool doesn't have values. Like, you can use it, you the person decide what you want to do with it, and then your praxis will tell you if it's useful or not. That's really all I'm saying. If there's anything of use in what anybody is calling science or whatever in the world, it's because it can be used by everybody. You see, the engineering principles that our brothers and sisters in the tunnels of Gaza are using to smoke those fuckers, to repurpose their bombs into things that have allowed them to keep the fight up without missing anything for over 2 years, are universal, but they don't have any values. You know what I mean? They're not like Western in any kind of way. Algorithm is not a Western. This is what I'm getting at. But all that bullshit about values, because, at one point we had some technological monopoly, which we then tried to enforce by genocide and stopping people from, getting educated in those principles. We are better, and this is all bullshit. This is what people call values. But you see, Aude, I hope you get my point.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a whole, interesting issue that is often raised. Oh, you can't. I mean, I forget who said it. It was some kind of more contemporary, later 20th century thinker who said, I don't know if it was Audre Lorde or something about you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And it was kind of framed as you can't kind of work with the products of Western theory, tech, all of this to bring forth liberation and the new. And in some ways, I understand what they're trying to say is be very wary of, for example, the way in which Western Marxism has reproduced colonial thinking, right? That's true. However, I don't think that the tools carry the values, as you're pointing out. I mean, what happens is that, and that's why it has been possible through colonialism and imperialism to appropriate so much indigenous and non-Western inventions, and knowledges and techniques, and from that experience of eons of relating and being on the land. The problem is that then it's turned into, inserted within a system of relations, which is what capitalism is, that exploits them, that turns them into commodities, that makes them dead. So it's not the things themselves, because
exactly. And the things are not even things, and Kadri is brilliant on this. It's all social relations. And so you see this crazy thing like China using exactly the same tools, market instruments, blah, 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 even having billionaires, well,
Mhm.
they are doing something totally different. How do you know? Well, you look at the outcomes. On one side, you have reduced lifespan, death, genocide, wars, and on the other side, you have climbing, 800 million out of poverty, but not just, they get $2 a day. No, 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 no. Access to education, health, transport, roads, roof over their head, electricity, clean water, internet. That's what they mean by longer lifespans with the same tools. Well, they're not tools, they're social relations. And and that is what jumped at me in cadre. Stop looking at the numbers of, so much money goes north, so much money goes south. No, no, no. It's a social system of social relations in which you have one fucking psychopathic, narcissistic bully oppressing everybody else. And one little, some guys who have managed to regain sovereignty, and they are going to show that it can be done differently. But the Chinese are so wise. They don't go, we know the way. We know the way. We, the China people, are the smartest because we're 5,000-year-old, blah, 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 nation civilization. No, they go, well, this worked for us. It's, they don't joke when they say Chinese characteristics. They're basically saying, this is for us, for our social nature, which evolved over thousands of years and whatever. And there are contradictions and blah, 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 and class struggle like everybody else. But we're not telling you do the same. We're just saying, look, you can do it your way. We're doing it our way. What is your way? I have no idea because it's your way. This is the basis of self-determination. And these guys are actually doing it on the international level. I wish they would go after the fucking Zionist entity, but I think I sort of understand what they're doing. Although as a Western guy, I want, blood on the walls when there is a problem.
Well, yeah, well, I think you had a wonderful episode, and I still refer back to it when talking with friends about, well, what is the strategy here? I talk about the problem of boiling a psychopathic frog.
Yeah.
So people should go back and find, well, they can't because it's suppressed, but you'll have to recreate it and publish
the same way as you bring down a 5-year-old in the middle of a fucking, the bacon crisis, we call it here in Quebec. When they go,
yeah, right, exactly. But what we are kind of concluding on right now in terms of the discussion flows very nicely for what will be the topic for office hours next week, when I have a wonderful scholar, Bikram Gill, coming.
Yes.
Yeah,
He's just accepted to come on our podcast. Thank you, Bikram. We also
that's
like I'm stalking you, right?
yeah.
Every time you invite somebody,
We're on the same wavelength. We want to be talking about these kinds of issues, and so we look at it from who has something to contribute to building our comprehensive analysis to really understand what the hell is going on and how we can, stop this. So
yes, I hope we can stop it.
so Bikram Gill will be coming on, and we'll be talking about sovereign development versus imperial war, which I think is what we were just kind of on the cusp of here. And so I hope everybody will try and attend next week. It'll be same time, 5 p.m., Friday, November 21st, in our continuing series of office hours, these open discussions for learning, for liberation, and building a community. Again, wonderful comments in the chat. I had so many occasions to pull things, people reacting and responding, and people definitely are excited to have you come back, Benji. I saw 3 or 4 comments saying, yes, new liberation psychology 2 episode must happen. And so we will definitely make it happen.
The dog loves it because literally every time I start a podcast, he comes and sits on my lap.
Oh, right.
So the dog also is voting for it.
Yeah, feeling, that somewhere southwest of him is something good happening,
Yes, yes.
some flow of consciousness, of love, of resistance, is something we hold on to. And that's why I value so much the community. And I want to say thanks to all the commentators and everybody who's listening or watching, but especially those who come onto the YouTube chat and, really engage in the dialogue and give us feedback and things to think about. I want to thank, all of the people who've been.
You're right. It is a community. Like since I started speaking out again, I really feel like I'm finding my community. And to me, those of you who comment regularly and even newcomers, I'm part of you, you're part of me. I love it. It's there's something very special in what we're doing, very precious, and we are going to keep on doing it.
We will, and we will have you, as well, not just in the chat, but back for another episode. But I see so many, as you're saying, regular people coming, and then new people joining. Many of the people who've been coming since the very beginning, basically. Ode to John Trudell and Haile Selah, Ezekiel Mordecai, Jonah Colley, and Lee.
We're Pilgrim. Yeah, so many of them. Yeah. Red Kitty.
Red Kitty. Yeah, these are all people who.
Balancing Act, VM. Oh my God, so many of you guys.
Sure, yes.
I'm afraid I'm missing people. Forgive me if I missed you.
But I'm just reading what's here, and I don't want to go on and on. But I also want to say to Patmos Revelator, yes, I'm so happy to hear that it's a bright spot in your life. And that's not just due to Benji and I for the discussion we had, but to all of you for participating here tonight. So we look
also a bit of your sexy, Adnan.
That's of course. Well, that's a given. I have to think deep into history, Arjun, and that is a reminder as well to say that go listen to Deep into History. It's a wonderful podcast. It's very different from my sort of history work, which is more about discussing history, but he really tries to bring it alive and does narratives, and he's got a wonderful voice and a sense of drama, and it's well written, and that's why he's been nominated for an award. So go check out his podcast, and go once you've enjoyed and benefited from it, go vote for the audience awards for best documentary podcast. I believe it's a Canadian, but it's the internet. Just go, from wherever you are. If you have to, use a VPN and support him. Everybody in our community, we like to support the good work that people are doing, and that's likewise the case for Resistance is Fertile, which continues. You can follow on Substack, and I posted the Substack link above. I'm going to put it in the episode description so that people can follow there, and of course you can follow Benji on X as well, and I'll put those links in the description after the live stream is over, and look forward to meeting all of you and seeing you again next week when we talk with Bikram Gill. So until next time, salam,
shukran, salam,
and solidarity.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine, always.
Always.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.